Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, back with cards using the new Celebrate Rose Corner stamp set. My last video used this stamp set and I told y'all how obsessed I was with it. And in that video, I was saying how this would be a great set to make 5x7 cards with that I don't do very often. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm also going to use a product I haven't used in a really long time for whatever reason, but I'll get to that in a minute. So I'm starting off with Canson XL watercolor paper, and I have it in my MISTI, and I used my anti-static powder tool first, just to prevent embossing powder from sticking to anything other than the stamped image. And then I'm inking up this great big floral image with clear embossing ink, and I do this twice to make sure I've got it all stamped properly. And I did tilt it in the light because when you're stamping with clear ink on top of white paper, you basically can't see it at all. But I made sure the whole image was stamped, and then I coated it with Simon's white embossing powder. After I've got it coated with the embossing powder, I'm going to melt this with my heat tool, and again, you tilt it back and forth in the light. You make sure there's no dull grainy areas because those are spots that haven't been melted by the heat tool. So I make sure everything is completely melted. Once that's done, I'm going to tape this down to a hardboard with some painter's tape. I highly recommend doing this. In some of my previous videos using the Nuvo shimmer powders, I don't do this. The paper curls so badly. It does flatten out as it dries, but it helps to keep it flat so that all the liquid doesn't just pool to the edges. So I've got everything taped to keep it flat. I've put my flour sackcloth onto my work surface because these powders do move no matter what when you spray water. And I'm going to spray a lot of water, so this just kind of protects everything, absorbs it, etc. Now, Nuvo shimmer powders. I will have a link at the end of this video to a playlist because I've done many videos using these over the years. It's just been a long time, and there's like new colors have come out since the last time I've done a video using these. So they are pigment powders with shimmer added to them. And number one thing, do not squeeze these bottles. If you squeeze them, you end up with just a pile of powder. You don't need much. Like you can see here, I'm not adding very much powder. All I do is I hold it, I don't squeeze it, and I basically just kind of tap or scrape my fingernail against the bottom to get just the smallest amounts of powder out. And I applied the powders in the areas roughly where they were needed. So I did greens on the leaves and then the colors on the florals. So for this first one, I did Falling Leaves shimmer powder, and then I added SUNRAY CROSETTE, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that properly, and Maroon Spark to the florals. And then I heavily sprayed this with water from my distress sprayer. And it looks like a hot mess. I know. This is one of those things where you gotta trust me. It looks horrible until it dries. Just there's something about the way the liquid pulls up, and it's just like, what am I doing? Like, this is ridiculous. But just stick with me. So I sprayed it heavily with water. I do a little bit of fiddling, not much. I don't want to move things around. I don't want to overwork things because the magic of these is just letting them do their own thing. And then when they dry, it's amazing. But with this, all I did was add a little bit of water to just a palette and added some of that Maroon Spark powder to it, mixed up. And I was just pressing my brush into it and then just filling in some areas that just didn't have color. And then I was using basically a dry baby wipe to kind of soak up some of the excess liquid around the outside of this image, and I let it dry, and that's what you are left with. So that's what I mean when I say it. Like, just let it dry. Like, you got to walk away. It takes a while to dry because I heavily saturate this with water. It's also why you want to work with like a watercolor paper. The Canson XL has always worked great for me with this, and it's pretty cheap. And yeah, this turned out so well. Like, I was only going to do one card originally, but I loved how it was turning out, and I was like, I have to do more. I was like, what about this color combo? What about these colors? So I had repeated the process and heat embossed the same image onto the Canson XL watercolor paper, taped it down to a hardboard. And then this one, I'm using Jade Fountain. So that's my greens. And then I'm going to go in with Lilac Waterfall and a little bit of Cherry Bomb. So people always ask too, like, how do you know how much powder to use? Honestly, I'm just going with it. I've used these quite a bit, so I have a rough idea with the colors. Like, certain colors are more intense than others with these. The lighter colors aren't as, I don't want to say aren't as pigmented, but they don't spread as much, or they're not as crazy, and I'm using air quotes with that. The ones with red pigments, like the Cherry Bomb, any of the red pigment ones especially, I've said this in other videos, red is a beast all on its own. So you just gotta play with it. And then another thing I do is, you can see I'm holding my spray bottle quite high up. I'm trying to get more of like a mist at the beginning, just to let it fall onto the project, because again, these are powders, and if you're spraying like really close at first and roughly, like, the water will literally just push the powder off onto your cloth, whatever. You don't have to have a flour sack cloth. You can use like a towel, just anything to protect your work surface, because this can get messy. But it is something to just play with. I've used them enough that I can roughly, figure it out. The other thing to always avoid too, and that's where I use my brush, is after spraying it, even spraying it so heavily with water, if there are areas that the powder didn't mix with water, that's what I'll swirl my brush into to make sure that powder is mixed. Because if there's no water with that powder, the powder will just fall off later, and create a big mess, because again, there's pigments in here. So it's fun to play with. You don't need any coloring experience. It's also just kind of like the excitement of like heat embossing or ink smushing, because you're not 100% sure what you're going to get, and then you're just spraying it with water. It looks like absolute garbage. And then you walk away from it. That is I think the hardest part, in a sense, especially for me, is to just do all this, spray it with water. It looks like crap. I walk away, and then I come back and it's dry, and it's just like, oh. I even drug Chris into my office, and I was like, look what I did. Look at this. And he was impressed. He thought that was really cool. So this was a lot of fun. So I did a third, of course. And this one I used Green Parade, Jade Fountain. Both those are greens. Green Parade is one of those what I call intense ones. There are some massively dark pigments in the Green Parade. You'll see when this one is done, like, how much more intense the greenery is. And then I used the SUNRAY, CROSETTE, and Solar Flare. Solar Flare is a very, very bright yellow. That was one of the original ones that came out whenever it was, back in the year that these were released. So I did the exact same method with this third one, and a little bit of fiddling with my brush, but trying again not to, mix everything too much, or, put too much into it, I guess, in a sense, not wanting to overwork it. So once everything's just filled in, again, you set it aside, you let it dry. Once everything's dry, I remove the painter's tape, and then I've got these fabulous panels with shimmer and color, and again, no coloring experience necessary. So this is a great way with big, huge florals like this to color them, because look at this. Like, all I did was tap that powder, spray it with water, a teensy bit of fiddling, and this is what I'm left with. And they're So much fun. And the shimmer and like sparkle. I'll show a course at the end like I always do with the flashlight on my phone, because as always, video and pictures just don't do them justice. So these panels are completely dry. I am going to trim them down. Right now they're way too big. They're like 7 inches by 8 inches or something like that, because I wanted space to tape them down and whatnot. So I end up trimming these down to about 4.5 by 6.5 inches, because yeah, these are going to be adhered to 5 by 7 card bases. So I use my trimmer and I trim all the like excess off of the edges until I'm just kind of happy with how I've got everything like laid out. And then for my card bases, I have Simon's 120 pound smooth white cardstock, and I cut these pieces down to 7 inches by 10 inches. And then I'm scoring them at 5 inches with my Teflon bone folder. So these will create side fold 5 by 7 cards. So I reinforce the fold with my Teflon bone folder. And I always have to flip this over because my little score buddy isn't quite big enough to do bigger card bases like this, but that's fine. So reinforce the fold with that. And just go back and forth with the side of my bone folder, because this is a very heavyweight cardstock. This is kind of my go-to, or it is my go-to cardstock for card bases, because it's just the perfect weight. Anyway, so made the card bases. Once those are made, I'm going to fold these card bases inside out to fit into my MISTI. And then I'm just going to kind of line them up and reposition this great big floral image. So this is going to go on the inside of the card. So once I've got that repositioned, I'm going to ink up this floral with Simon's Fog ink. And on camera, again, you can barely see it, but in real life, it's there. It's just very subtle. Like fog is like the perfect go-to neutral, because it's just such a light neutral gray. So repeated the process with the other 2 card bases. So just fold it inside out, line it up in the same spot, ink up the stamp with the fog ink, stamp the inside of the card base, and then go on and do the next one. So once they're all stamped with the floral, I'm then going to use a sentiment from the new XL Stacked Greetings stamp set that just came out in this happy and joyful release. Love. I hope that we get a bunch more sets like this, like in this exact orientation. There's something about having the sentiments like this, the size of the fonts, everything. I love it. Love it. So I put the inside out card base back in my MISTI, just positioned it this time in the corner, and I'm inking up one of the sentiments with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, and then just repeating the process. So stamping that on the inside of all 3 cards with that VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, and then setting those cards bases aside to dry, because Nocturne ink takes a little while to dry, and I have learned many times. I still keep learning, because it's like, darn it, just stop touching it, let it dry. It smears otherwise. So anyway, while those were drying, I took another sentiment from that same XL Stacked Greeting set, and I have some vellum here, and I use my anti-static powder tool on it, and I'm going to ink up the sentiment with clear embossing ink. And this time, when I lifted the lid, because it's vellum and clear embossing ink is sticky, it took the vellum with it, which is fine. That was actually kind of perfect, because then I could press from behind there to make sure I got a good impression of the sentiment. So that was fine. But the second time I did it, I had the magnet holding the vellum a little more strongly this time, and I ended up, you can't tell on camera, but I smeared the sentiment. It's not straight here, and I realized that as I was pressing, I was like, why does it look like a shadow? Oh, yep, I wrecked it, which is fine. Off camera, I stamped that sentiment 2 more times onto another piece of vellum, coated it with detail white embossing powder, and melted it with my heat tool. Again, working with a vellum, embossing powder melts extremely quickly, so just pay attention, because you can actually burn vellum very, very quickly, like in seconds. So quick blast with the heat tool, everything's smooth and melted, good to go. And then after I have all my sentiments done, I'm going to use, there's like a little coordinating rounded edge rectangle wafer die that works with this set. So I use that to die cut all those sentiments. And then to adhere those to the panel, I just used my craft tacky glue. I used the bottle that I have this fine metal tip on. And I have sped this up in editing, but again, it didn't take that long. I like sentiments like this because they're what I like to call chunky. So I've got a good amount of space to apply some glue, and it's hidden behind that heat embossed sentiment because otherwise it would show through the vellum. So I adhered that, put blocks over it, and then just repeated the process with the cards. Let those sentiments dry, and then the back of all these panels I coated with Simon's Big Mama foam tape. And then I don't always do this, but these are big panels, and this is a lot of foam tape. And I want to make sure I have just that, I just need that little second of wiggle room. So I apply craft tacky glue on top of the foam tape, like after I took off the release paper. And then it gives you that little, again, that like second of wiggle room, because the foam tape, once it's down, it's adhered for good. The amount of card bases I've wrecked because I've applied things, crooked and had to you literally have to rip the card base off. Anyway, that finished off the cards. I've got my flashlight on my phone to try and show the shimmer and the glitter. And everyone, I get comments when I do these videos, like people ask oh, does it rub off? Like Tim Holt says, don't lick your artwork. Just no. I don't rub my hands on things after I'm done. If the recipient chooses to do that when they get the card, well, that's on them, literally. It doesn't come off, but if you feel better like sealing it, you can use like a spray sealant, like a matte spray, like Krylon makes one, and like things like that. You can do that. That's totally fine. I've never bothered. I've never had a problem. And like I said, as long as there aren't any pigment powders left sitting that haven't mixed with water, it's fine. But if you want to seal it, you totally can. Nothing wrong with it. I just don't. To me, it's like kind of an extra unnecessary step. So I know I did not add like bling or splatter to these. The shimmer and how these turn, I didn't want to do it. I wanted the florals and the sentiments just to be the main focus. And I'm really happy with how they turned out. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. And as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. I'll have a supply list. I'll link to all the supplies I used, so you can check that out below if you are interested. And thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting. I very much appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.